The first time my stepmother called me the help in front of the whole family, she was holding a microphone shaped like a champagne bottle, and I was holding a tray of deviled eggs I had paid for myself. It was my father's 60th birthday, a Friday evening in a rented country club room outside Columbus, Ohio, and every round table had little gold balloons tied to the centerpieces. I remember the smell of roast beef, floor polish, and my own hands, because I had scrubbed them raw that morning after rolling out 300 mini biscuits in my apartment kitchen. I had been invited as a daughter. I had been used as a caterer. And right when I was trying to slide quietly past the dessert table, Marlene tapped the microphone and said, "Everybody, let's give Jenna a hand. She's not technically part of the original family, but she's always willing to serve." People laughed because they thought they were supposed to. That is the thing about public cruelty in a polite room. It rarely sounds like cruelty at first. It sounds like a joke, and the room looks around for permission. My stepsister Brittany covered her mouth, but not enough to hide her smile. My father looked down at his plate like the roast beef had suddenly become complicated. I stood there with that heavy tray burning my fingers through the paper doily, and for 1 second I could hear every small sound: ice cracking in glasses, a fork drop near the bar, a child whining because someone had taken his roll. Then Marlene added, "Don't worry, honey. We saved you a spot near the kitchen, so you can pop up if anything runs low." I was 32 years old. I had a mortgage, a business license, and 2 employees who called me boss. But in that room, I was 11 again, standing in the hallway of the house my father moved us into after my mother died, learning which towels I was allowed to use, and which refrigerator shelf was for the girls. The girls meant Brittany and Lauren, Marlene's daughters from her first marriage. I was never one of the girls. I was your father's daughter. When I made a mess, sweetie, when guests were watching, and old enough to understand whenever something hurt. I wish I could tell you I threw the tray down and walked out. That would make me sound braver than I was. What I did was smile so hard my cheeks shook. I set the deviled eggs on the buffet, wiped a little paprika from my thumb, and said, "Of course." Then I walked to the small 2-person table near the swinging kitchen door, the one with no centerpiece and no place card, and I sat down beside a stack of extra napkins. From there I could see my father's profile as everyone sang to him. He did not look at me once during the song. I had almost not come. 2 weeks earlier, Marlene had called me at 9:30 at night, which was already a warning. She never called unless something needed lifting, fixing, buying, or forgiving. "Your father wants all his children there," she said. "And before you ask, yes, that includes you." I was standing in the back room of my little breakfast cafe, counting quarters from the register, because our card reader had gone down that afternoon. I remember pressing the phone between my shoulder and ear while I wrapped leftover cinnamon rolls for the shelter pickup. "That's nice," I said carefully. "What time should I be there?" There was a pause, just long enough for me to know the invitation had a hook. "Well," she said, "since food is your thing, I told the club you'd bring some personal touches. Nothing huge, just appetizers, biscuits, maybe those lemon bars your father likes. It would mean so much to him." My father had not asked me himself. That should have been enough. But love does not always leave through the front door. Sometimes it hides in stupid little errands. It says, maybe if I bring the lemon bars, he'll remember my mother made them first. Maybe if I show up calm, they'll stop treating me like a stray that followed him home. So I baked after closing, drove across town with boxes stacked in my back seat, and arrived early enough to watch Marlene hand-matching corsages to Brittany and Lauren. Mine was in a plastic grocery bag on a chair. The ribbon was crushed flat, and the white carnation had already browned at the edge. Still, I pinned it on. That was the part I hated most when I looked back later. Not that they humiliated me, I knew who they were. What shamed me was how much of myself I kept offering them for another chance to be claimed. After the birthday song, my father finally came over. He moved slowly because of his bad knee, one hand on the backs of chairs as he crossed the room. For a second, hope rose in me so fast it was embarrassing. He leaned down, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, "Don't make a thing of it today, Jen. Marlene's been under pressure." Then he patted my shoulder twice and went back to the head table, where his real family had left his seat warm. I sat there until my legs stopped feeling like mine. Guests came by for more biscuits and told me they were delicious. One woman I did not know said, "You should open a bakery," and I almost laughed, because I had, 3 years earlier, with no family at the ribbon cutting except my college roommate and the mailman from the strip mall. Across the room, Brittany held up her phone for selfies with my father. Lauren adjusted his party hat. Marlene stood behind them with both hands on his shoulders, guarding the picture like a queen behind a throne. Then the club manager came through the kitchen door carrying an invoice folder. He looked at the family tables, then at me by the napkins, and walked straight over. "Mrs. Rourke listed you as the outside food contact," he said quietly. "We just need a card for the service fee." I stared at him, not understanding at first. The room kept laughing behind him. My father was opening a gag gift. Marlene was watching me over his shoulder, smiling like she had already seen how this would go. The balance was $840. My rent for the cafe was due Monday. My own electric bill was folded in my purse with a red stamp on it. I asked the manager for a minute and stood up so fast the chair scraped the wall. Marlene met me halfway, near the coffee urns, before I could reach my father. "Don't embarrass him," she said, still smiling for anyone who glanced over. "Not on his birthday." Her voice stayed soft, but her eyes were flat and bright. "You always say you want to be treated like family. Family helps." That was the moment something in me shifted, but not enough to save me yet. I did not explode. I did not refuse. I walked to my purse, took out my debit card with fingers that felt far away, and paid for the privilege of being insulted. The receipt printed with a thin, whining sound, and I folded it once before putting it away, not because I had a plan, but because my hands needed something to do besides shake. When I got home that night, my cafe smelled like sugar, coffee grounds, and bleach. I had left the back light on. On the prep table sat one last box of lemon bars I had forgotten to load into the car, 12 perfect squares under plastic wrap, dusted with powdered sugar that had not yet melted. My phone buzzed before I could take off my coat. It was a text from my father. "Thanks for today. You know how she gets." Then, 3 dots appeared, disappeared, and appeared again. The next message said, "Your mother would be proud you kept the peace." I stood in the dark back room of my own business, reading that sentence until the screen went black in my hand. Then I heard someone knock on the front glass, 3 sharp taps from the sidewalk, even though the cafe had been closed for hours. The knock came again, 3 hard taps that sounded too clean for midnight. I wiped my face with the back of my wrist, shoved the receipt under the register drawer, and looked through the front glass. My father stood under the striped awning in his birthday jacket, the same navy blazer Marlene had brushed crumbs off of, while I stood beside a tray of deviled eggs like hired staff. He had one hand tucked in his pocket and the other holding a paper plate covered in foil. For half a second, my stupid heart lifted. I thought he had driven across town to say the thing he should have said at the club. When I unlocked the door, he stepped in carefully, like the cafe floor might accuse him. "You left without saying goodbye." I stared at him. "You watched me pay $840 because your wife pretended I was catering staff." His face pinched, not with anger, but with discomfort. "That was worse." "Jenna, lower your voice. There's no one here." "That's not the point." He set the foil, covered plate on the counter. "Marlene is very upset." I laughed once, because if I didn't, I was going to break something. "Marlene is upset?" "She feels you embarrassed her in front of people." The cafe was still warm from the ovens, but I felt cold from my throat down. Behind him, the neon open sign was dark. The chairs were upside down on the tables. My whole little business looked braced for a storm. I asked, "Did you come here to check on me?" He didn't answer fast enough. That was the answer. He rubbed his forehead and looked toward the pastry case, where one last box of lemon bars sat waiting for a pickup that had never come. "I came because this is getting out of hand." The manager mentioned the service fee to one of Marlene's friends. Now people are talking like she stiffed the club. She did stiff the club. "You paid it. Because you told me not to make a thing of it." He looked at the counter, and his eyes caught the edge of the white receipt sticking out from under the drawer. I saw him see it. I saw him decide not to touch it. "Please don't send that around," he said. "I wasn't planning to. I just know how these things get. One screenshot, and then everyone has an opinion." There it was again, the old family weather system. The problem was never what happened. The problem was who noticed. I walked around the counter and picked up the foil plate. Under it was a smashed corner piece of his birthday cake. The frosting stuck to the foil in blue streaks. You brought me leftovers? I thought you might not have eaten. I wanted to throw it into the sink. Instead, I set it down gently, which took more control than yelling would have. I made half the food at your party. I paid to serve it. I carried it in the side door. Then your wife called me the help into a microphone. His mouth moved before words came. She shouldn't have said it like that. Like that, Jenna? No. Say the real sentence. He looked tired, and for once I didn't feel sorry for him. He was 60 years old and still acted like peace was something women made for him. You want me to say she was wrong? He said. Fine, she was wrong. But you know how she gets when she feels cornered. I leaned both palms on the counter. She wasn't cornered. She had a champagne microphone. That landed. Not enough to change him, but enough to make him look away. He reached into his jacket, and I thought maybe he had brought cash. I hated that I thought it. I hated the little hopeful calculation that flashed through me, because $840 was not a small amount to me, and he knew it. My father looked at the closed register, the dark pastry case, and the plate of leftover birthday cake like one of those things might answer for him. Then he said, "So what do you want me to do, Jenna?" Not. I'm sorry. Not. I should have stopped her. He said it the way a man says. Tell me which form to sign so I can get back to my quiet house. I stood behind my own counter with flour still in the cracks of my fingers, and for the first time, the cafe did not feel like proof that I had made something. It felt like a place where he had come to make me small in private after letting it happen in public. I want you to say it without wrapping it in Marlene, I told him. She called me the help. You heard it. I paid $840 because no one in that room wanted the scene to be about what she did. His face tightened at the number, but not in the way I needed. He looked toward the front window, toward the empty street, as if a customer might be outside, listening through glass. I didn't know it was that much, he said. That's not the point, I said. It is when you run a business, he answered, and for 1 second, I almost laughed. He had found the one part he could understand and avoided the part that had broken me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his checkbook. That old leather cover had been in his pocket my whole childhood. I had watched him use it at school fundraisers, at church auctions, at the hardware store, when he bought paint for the house. Marlene later redecorated until there was no picture of my mother left in the hall. He clicked the pen twice, wrote the date, and paused over the amount. I hated how fast hope moved in me. It was embarrassing, how a grown woman with a mortgage and employees could still feel her chest open because her father might write one decent check. Then he said, "If I do this, I need you to call Marlene tomorrow and smooth things over." The hope went cold so quickly it felt physical. Smooth what over? I asked. He kept his eyes on the check. She's embarrassed. She should be. She feels attacked. By who? I said. The deviled eggs? He finally looked up, and there was the tired anger I knew from my teens, the one that only came out when I made his life less convenient. Don't get sharp with me. That sentence moved through the cafe like a draft under a door. Not because it was loud, because it was familiar. I had heard it when I asked why Brittany got a car and I got bus fare. I had heard it when Lauren borrowed my graduation dress and spilled wine on it. I had heard it whenever the truth in my mouth made the room uncomfortable. I took the foil off the cake plate he had brought and set it beside the register. The frosting had slid to one side in the car, and a corner was mashed flat against the plastic lid. Did she send this? I asked. I brought it. Did she cut it for me? He rubbed his forehead. Jenna, answer me. He stared at the cake like it had betrayed him. No, that was when I knew. He had not come with apology cake. He had come with leftovers nobody wanted to eat after the party moved on without me. The back door opened before either of us spoke again. Nia, my morning cashier, stepped in wearing sweatpants under her coat, her hair tied up in a scarf. She froze when she saw my father. Sorry, she said. I saw the light on. I thought maybe the freezer alarm was acting up again. I could tell from her face that she had been crying recently. Her little boy had been sick all week, and I had covered 2 of her shifts myself because she could not lose the hours. She looked at the cake, then at me, then at my father's checkbook, and something like shame flashed across his face. Not shame for me. Shame that someone outside the family had walked in before he could finish making the deal. It's okay, I told her. Go home, I'll handle it. But Nia did not move. Her eyes went to the stack of catering boxes by the prep table, the ones I had washed after the party and brought back because I could not afford to replace them. "You sure?" she asked softly. "I'm sure." My father cleared his throat. "We're having a private conversation." Naya's face changed. She was gentle by nature, almost too gentle for the breakfast rush, but she had a way of going still when somebody crossed a line. "This is her shop," she said. "I know whose shop it is," he snapped. And there it was, the smallest crack. For years he had acted like my life outside his house was a side room he could enter whenever Marlene sent him. But Nia standing there in her winter coat made him look like what he was. A man scolding his daughter at her workplace after midnight. I stepped out from behind the counter. My knees felt weak, but my voice did not. "Dad, put the checkbook away." He blinked. "You just said—" "I said what happened. I didn't ask you to buy my silence." He closed the checkbook slowly. "That is not what this is." "Then write the check and leave Marlene out of it." His jaw moved, but no words came. The silence answered better than he could have. Nia looked down, giving us the privacy he had demanded too late. My phone buzzed on the counter. Marlene's name filled the screen. I did not answer. It buzzed again before it even went dark, then a text dropped in so fast I knew she had been waiting with the phone in her hand. I did not open it. I did not need to. My father's expression told me enough. "She's worried," he said. "She should sleep," I said. "Tomorrow's Saturday." He hesitated, and that hesitation had weight. "She invited some people over after church on Sunday. Just immediate family. She thought you could bring biscuits and those lemon bars. Show everyone we're okay." Nia made a tiny sound behind me. Not quite a gasp, not quite a laugh. My father heard it. His ears went red. I looked at the last box of lemon bars on the prep table, the ones I had planned to sell by the square in the morning. They were already wrapped, already priced, already counted into the day's cash flow. For once, I saw them as inventory before I saw them as an offering. "No," I said. He waited. Like the rest of the sentence had to be hiding somewhere. "No?" "No. I'm opening at 6. I'm selling my food to customers who pay for it." He picked up the cake plate with both hands. "You're making this harder than it has to be." "I know," I said. "That's new for me." His face did something then that almost hurt worse than anger. He looked old. He looked tired. He looked like he wanted me to rescue him from the choice I had placed in front of him. But I did not move. I did not soften the room. I did not say, "Tell Marlene I'll call tomorrow." He carried the cake to the door, then stopped with his hand on the lock. "Your mother wouldn't like seeing you this way," he said. That line should have knocked me down. A week earlier, it would have. But behind me, I heard Nia quietly start stacking the clean catering boxes, making a neat tower out of what I had dragged home from my own humiliation. The sound grounded me. Plastic corner on plastic corner. A small, useful rhythm. "Don't bring her into this," I said. "Not tonight." My father left without the check, without the cake, and without looking back at me through the window. His taillights pulled out of the lot and disappeared toward the side of town, where every house had a guest room I had never slept in. Nia waited until the car was gone. Then she set the last clean box on top of the stack and said, "You want me to stay and help prep?" I almost said no out of habit. I almost protected everyone from the cost of being near me. Instead, I looked at the lemon bars, the unpaid invoice folded under the register drawer, and the phone still lighting up with Marlene's name. "Yes," I said. "But only if I pay you for the hour." Nia nodded like that was the only answer she would have accepted. While she washed her hands, I opened Marlene's text at last. It was only one sentence, but it made the quiet cafe feel suddenly crowded. "If you embarrass this family again tomorrow, don't expect your father to keep bailing you out." By Saturday morning, I had slept maybe 90 minutes, and the cafe punished me for it immediately. The espresso grinder jammed, the card reader froze twice, and a man in a fishing vest told me my coffee tasted tired, which felt so accurate I almost thanked him. I kept moving because stopping would have made room for my father's voice, for Marlene's text, for that ugly little phrase from the club that still sat on my skin like spilled grease. The help. I had scrubbed counters, restocked napkins, smiled at regulars, and told myself the same thing over and over. This was my shop, not their stage, not their apology basket, mine. At 10:15, the bell over the door rang, and Mrs. Alvarez from my father's church stepped in with her purse tucked tight under her elbow. She was one of those women who could make a cardigan look official. She smiled at me, but it had worry in it. Jenna, honey, I'm sorry to bother you during rush. Marlene said you were donating dessert trays for tomorrow's fellowship lunch, and I just wanted to confirm pickup time. My hand stopped on the pastry case handle. Nia, who was writing names on cups, looked up so fast the marker squeaked. Mrs. Alvarez kept talking because she didn't yet know she had walked into a wire. She said lemon bars, brownies if you had them. Maybe those little almond cookies your mother used to. No, I said. It came out sharper than I meant, but not louder. That was the strange part. I didn't shout. I didn't explain. I just let the word stand there. Mrs. Alvarez blinked. Behind her, two college girls pretending not to listen, stopped pretending. Nia set the marker down and moved closer to the register, not to protect me exactly, but to remind me I wasn't alone behind that counter. Mrs. Alvarez lowered her voice. Oh, I thought it was already arranged. It was arranged without me, I said. If the church wants to place a paid order, I can tell you what I have available. But I'm not donating anything through Marlene. Her face changed then. Not into judgment, into recognition. Like she had heard the sentence behind the sentence and decided not to make me say it in front of strangers. She opened her purse, took out a small church envelope, and slid it across the counter. Then tell me what this will buy. I looked down. Cash. Not enough for 6 trays, not even close, but real money from somebody who had chosen not to let Marlene's promise become my burden. For 1 second, my throat tightened so hard I couldn't answer. Nia stepped in smoothly. 2 dozen lemon bars if we cut them small. Pick up tomorrow morning before service. Then she looked at me for permission, not assumption. That little pause mattered more than she knew. I nodded. Mrs. Alvarez touched the envelope with 2 fingers. Put the order under my name, she said. Not hers. Then she leaned closer, and her voice softened into something almost private. Your mother used to say yes when she meant no. It wore her down. She didn't wait for me to respond. She just turned and left, cardigan, purse, and all, while the bell over the door gave one bright little shake. For the rest of the day, I worked like a person trying not to cry into powdered sugar. I baked the paid trays. I boxed them with plain white labels. No ribbon, no note, no family message. When Nia saw me staring too long at the last pan, she said, You know she's going to act like you ruined Easter, even though it's August. I laughed once, a cracked sound. She can act however she wants. Nia wiped the counter. That sounds healthy, but your eye is twitching. She was right. My whole body was already walking into Sunday, even though my feet were still on the cafe floor. The next morning, I drove to church with the 2 paid boxes on the passenger seat and the foil-covered plate my father had left at the cafe sitting on the floor mat. I had washed it. That felt important in a way I didn't want to examine. The cake was gone, the crumbs were gone, and the plate shone under the thin foil, like I was returning evidence of a kindness that had never existed. I told myself I would drop off Mrs. Alvarez's order, give back the plate, and leave before lunch. No speech. No scene. No begging my father to choose me in a hallway full of people who had known me since I wore patent leather shoes. The church kitchen smelled like coffee urns, floor cleaner, and baked ham. Mrs. Alvarez met me by the swinging door and took the boxes with both hands. Paid order received, she said, loud enough for the 2 women by the sink to hear. I almost smiled. Then Marlene appeared beside the refrigerator in cream-colored linen, her hair sprayed smooth, her church face already arranged. My father stood behind her, holding a stack of paper plates. He looked smaller in that kitchen than he had in my cafe. Or maybe I was finally seeing the size he chose. There she is, Marlene said, bright as a knife. Jenna, sweetheart, we were starting to wonder if you'd come through. Mrs. Alvarez's eyes flicked to me. I set the clean foil plate on the metal prep table. It made a soft, final sound. I came to deliver Mrs. Alvarez's order, I said, and return this. My father looked at the plate first, not at me. The tiniest thing passed over his face. Shame or irritation, or maybe just exhaustion. Marlene's smile didn't move, but her neck flushed. Well, she said, I'm glad you remembered where your family is. That sentence could have dragged me right back into the old room, the old rules, the old version of myself that rushed to soften every edge. Instead, I looked at the boxes in Mrs. Alvarez's hands. They were paid for, labeled, accounted for. Mine until sold, hers once bought. Clean lines. Simple lines. I said, my family knows where my shop is when they want something from it. The sink women went very still. My father whispered, Jenna, not angry, warning, that was worse. Marlene gave a small laugh and turned toward him as if inviting him to handle me. This is exactly what I meant, she said. Everything has to be turned into an insult. Then she faced me again, and her voice dropped low enough that only the people in the kitchen could hear. You are making your father's life harder because you can't control your pride. I waited for him to say my name differently. I waited for one ordinary sentence. She shouldn't have done that to you. I'm sorry. I'll pay you back. Anything. He shifted the paper plates from one hand to the other. Let's not do this here, he murmured. No, I said. Let's not. I walked out through the side hallway before my body could betray me. I made it past the classrooms, past the bulletin board with mission trip photos, past the drinking fountain, where I used to stand while my mother pinned her choir name tag on straight. At the exit, Pastor Elaine stepped in from the courtyard and nearly collided with me. She was holding her robe over one arm, her reading glasses tucked in her collar. Jenna, I'm glad I caught you. Her voice was gentle, but there was something careful underneath it. Your father mentioned the cafe property might be changing hands. I didn't want to ask in front of everyone, but are you all right? The hallway seemed to narrow around me. For a second, I heard nothing but the hum of the vending machine beside the youth room. Changing hands? I said. Pastor Elaine's face told me she wished she had not been the first person to say it. Behind me, the kitchen door swung open, and my father's footsteps came into the hall. Pastor Elaine's words took all the sound out of that church hallway. Even the women near the kitchen doorway stopped pretending not to listen. My father came through the swinging door with Marlene behind him and looked past me toward the foil-covered plate, still sitting on the stainless steel counter like it had turned into something sharp. Marlene recovered first. She laughed once, too high and too quick, and said, Elaine, this is not the place. Pastor Elaine did not move. She stood beside me in the hallway and looked at my father, not at Marlene. Then tell your daughter someplace else, she said. Because if her cafe is about to be cleared out, I need to know whether our orders are going to a business or to a family argument. My father's face changed in a way I had not seen since I was a kid, and a police officer brought me home for riding my bike through the grocery store parking lot after dark. Not anger. Not guilt exactly. That tired, cornered look of a man who wanted the consequence without the conversation. He rubbed the back of his neck and said, Nothing is final. Marlene snapped. Dawn, that one syllable told me more than his whole sentence. I kept my hands at my sides, steady enough that nobody could accuse me of making a scene, and asked, What is not final? He looked at the floor. There's been interest in the building. My building? I said. The building your cafe is in, he said, and that careful wording landed like a slap. For 2 years, I had called it my cafe because I had painted the walls, fixed the grout behind the espresso machine, learned how to keep the old cooler alive by listening to its cough, and slept on flour sacks in the back room during my first winter, because I could not afford heat and payroll in the same week. But the deed, the taxes, the big adult words that people use when they want to remind you your work is not ownership, those belong to my father. I knew that. I had always known that. I just had not known he was willing to use it like a trapdoor. Who is interested? I asked. Marlene folded her arms. A group that can actually do something useful with that corner. Pastor Elaine's mouth tightened. Mrs. Alvarez, still near the doorway with her purse over her arm, whispered. Marlene. Marlene ignored her. It is not cruel to admit when something is not working, my father said. Jenna, I was going to talk to you after the weekend. After you let people measure it? I asked. He looked up too fast. There it was. Not a rumor, not a possibility. Something already moving without me. I looked through the open kitchen doorway at that stupid plate, still sitting where I had left it. Did you give someone a key? He did not answer. Marlene did. We gave access to professionals. They are not touching your things. My laugh came out before I could stop it, small and dry. That's what you think my life is? Things? Naya called me right then. I almost let it ring because every eye around me was on me, but something in my body knew better. I answered. Her voice was low and furious. Jenna, there are 2 men in here with a laser thing, and one of them just moved the pastry case. For a second, nobody near the kitchen doorway breathed. I looked straight at my father. They're there now? Naya said. Yeah. They said the owner approved a walkthrough. I told them the owner was at church, which apparently confused everybody. Marlene reached for my arm. I stepped back before she touched me. Do not, I said. And maybe it was the flatness in my voice, because she actually stopped. I left the church hallway without going back for the plate. My father followed me toward the exit, calling my name in the same tone he used when I was 14 and had embarrassed him in front of his friends. I did not turn around. Behind me, Pastor Elaine said, Dawn, go fix what you opened. That line followed us all the way out into the cold parking lot. Marlene was behind him, heels clicking fast, already saying this was being blown out of proportion. My father said, Jenna, slow down. I unlocked my truck. No, they're just looking. At a place I am open in tomorrow morning. He put his hand on the top of my door before I could close it. You have to understand, the numbers are bad. I looked at his hand first, then at his face. Move your hand. For once he did. When I got back to the cafe, the front door was propped open with my own chalkboard sign. The evening air had pushed inside, carrying street dust over the clean tables. One man stood by the wall with a tablet. The other had my pastry case pulled 6 inches out from its spot, and the little white cord to the warmer hung loose behind it. Nia stood between them and the counter with a broom in both hands like she was deciding how much jail time she could handle. There were 3 customers still inside, all silent, all pretending not to watch and failing. I walked straight to the warmer, plugged it back in, and felt the glass case start to hum under my palm. Only then did I speak. You need to leave. The man with the tablet gave me a practiced smile. We were told we had permission from the property owner. You don't have permission from the business owner, I said. And you moved equipment that keeps food at temperature. So, unless you want me to call the health department and explain why 2 strangers are handling my service area, you're done. His smile thinned. Ma'am, we're just doing our job. Then do it outside. Nia lowered the broom a little, not because she was backing down, but because she had heard the change in me. I was not shaking. That almost scared me more than shaking would have. My father came in before they left. Marlene came in behind him, cheeks bright from the cold and anger. The man with the tablet looked relieved. Mr. Rourke, we were just... My father lifted one hand, but he did not look at him. He looked at the pastry case, the open door, the 3 customers, Naya with the broom, and then me. For one thin second, I thought the sight of it might wake him up. Not the idea of my cafe, not the version he talked about like a favor he had extended, but the real room. The sugar on the counter, the half-labeled boxes, the old ceiling fan clicking like a bad knee. My whole day sitting there in pieces, waiting to be defended. Marlene filled the silence. This is exactly why we didn't tell you yet. You become impossible. I turned to the customers first, because they were the only people in that room who had paid to be there. I'm sorry for the interruption. Your drinks are on me tonight. One of them, a college kid who came in for black coffee and never said more than 5 words, shook his head and put a $10 bill in the tip jar. No, they're not, he said. The other 2 did the same. It was not a rescue. It did not solve a building sale. But it shifted the room just enough that Marlene saw it. And I saw her see it. The contractors packed up. They did it slowly, with wounded importance, but they left. My father held the door for them, and when he came back in, the cold followed him. I should have handled that differently, he said. It was the closest thing to an apology I had heard from him in years, and somehow it made me angrier than nothing. Handled what? I asked. Letting strangers into my workspace? Letting Marlene call it useless? Telling people I'm basically gone before you told me? He swallowed. The sale could clear some debt. Whose debt? I asked. He did not answer quickly enough. Naya's head turned toward him. Marlene said, Don't interrogate your father. I looked at her, then at him. No. Let him be a grown man in my cafe for once. My father flinched, and I knew I had hit something real. Not enough to change him. Not yet. But enough to make him look smaller than the room he claimed to own. He said, There are things you don't know. I reached behind me, untied my apron, and laid it on the counter between us. Then tomorrow morning, you can come here before we open and say them plainly. Not at church. Not through Marlene. Not with men measuring my walls while my employee guards the pastry case with a broom. Marlene made a disgusted sound. We are not reporting to you. I picked my apron back up and tied it on again, tighter this time. Then don't come. My father stared at the knot at my waist, like he finally understood I was not closing for the night, because he had frightened me. I was resetting the room. Nia moved beside me without being asked, and started sliding the pastry case back into place. The old wheels squealed against the tile, loud and ugly, and my father actually stepped forward to help. I put one hand up. No, I said. You don't get to move it twice in one day. He stopped. That was where I left him, standing in the middle of the cafe he could sell, unable to touch the pastry case. My father showed up before sunrise without Marlene, and somehow that scared me more than the contractors. He stood outside the cafe in the dark with his hands in his jacket pockets, not knocking, just watching me unlock the front door like he was waiting to see if I would let him in or make him say why he was there on the sidewalk. I almost did. I had slept 3 hours on Nia's couch above the dry cleaner, and my body felt full of sand. But the espresso machine was already warming, the ovens needed me, and I was too tired to perform daughterhood for a man who had let strangers measure my walls. I opened the door and said, "If Marlene is in the car, don't bring her inside." "She's not here," he said. "That's not an answer to anything." He nodded once, like he deserved that, and stepped in. For a second, he looked small in the cafe. Smaller than he had looked when I was a kid and he could reach the top shelves without a stool. The place smelled like yeast and cold coffee grounds. The pastry case was still crooked by those 6 inches, the contractors had moved it, and I had left it that way on purpose. I wanted him to see the wound, not the cleanup. He looked at the case, then at me. "I should have called. You should have done a lot more than that." He swallowed. "The sale isn't final." My hands froze on the stack of sheet pans. That was the first straight sentence he had given me in months. And it landed so hard I hated him for waiting until now. "But there is a sale. There's an offer." "From who?" He rubbed his thumb along the seam of his coat pocket. "A group that buys neighborhood properties. They approached me in January." "In January," I said, and the month tasted bitter. "You let me replace the back freezer in February." "I know." "You let me sign a year of catering contracts." "I know." "You let Marlene stand in my dining room and talk about my labor like it was something she could donate." His face twisted at that, but he didn't defend her. That almost made it worse. If he could be silent now, then all those other silences had been choices too. I took down the big mixing bowl and set it on the counter between us. "How much debt?" He stared at the bowl like the number might be hiding in the flour dust. "Enough that if I don't take the offer, I may lose the building anyway." I waited. Busy listeners might think silence is empty, but in a kitchen, it has weight. The compressors hum. The first tray ticks in the oven. A truck groans past the front windows. And a man who has avoided the truth either fills that silence or proves he came only to borrow your patience. Finally, he said, "I refinanced after your mother got sick, then again after the roof. Then Marlene's house in Delray didn't sell and I—" "No," I said. "Do not hand me her house before you hand me mine." His jaw tightened. "I helped her. I shouldn't have tied it to this place." There it was, not the whole disaster, but the shape of it. My cafe had been treated like a drawer he could reach into whenever another life needed cash. I thought I would scream. Instead, I slid an apron across the counter. He blinked at it. "What's that for?" "You came before opening." "Good, you can help." "Jenna." "No. If you're going to tell me I may lose this place, you can stand inside one morning and see what you're selling." I pointed to the sink. "Wash strawberries. Don't bruise them. If you bruise them, they bleed into the cream." He looked like I had slapped him with the apron, but he put it on. It was one of the old black ones with a bleach mark near the pocket, and it barely tied around him. For 10 minutes he washed berries under the thin spray while I rolled dough, and neither of us spoke. Then the first regulars began tapping at the glass before the sign was flipped. Mr. Kim from the pharmacy. Tasha with her 2 boys and a stroller. The bus driver who always bought 1 black coffee and 1 lemon bar, even at 6:30 in the morning. They saw my father behind the counter and paused just long enough to understand something had shifted, though none of them asked. Nia came in through the back with her hair still damp and stopped dead when she saw him at the sink. I shook my head once, a tiny signal that meant not now. She hung her coat, tied her apron, and took the register without making it a courtroom. That was one of the reasons I loved her. She knew the difference between witnessing and rescuing. The rush hit hard. It always did after a stormy night, when people wanted heat in their hands and something sweet enough to make the day less sharp. My father tried to keep up. He passed me berries too wet, and I made him dry them. He handed Nia the wrong size cups, and she corrected him without apology. When Tasha's little boy dropped a muffin, Dad reached for the broom before I could ask. I watched him bend down among the crumbs, and for one strange second I saw not the owner of the building, not the man with debts, but a guest in a life I had built without permission. Then Marlene walked in. She came through the front door in a camel coat and lipstick, too bright for morning, carrying a cardboard box against her hip. Behind her was a man I didn't know. Clean shoes, gray vest, the kind of smile people wear when they have already decided the room is temporary. My father straightened so fast the broom handle knocked the counter. Marlene saw the apron on him and laughed once. "Oh, Don. Really?" Nobody else laughed. That was new. I wiped my hands on a towel. "We're open. This won't take long," she said, setting the box on the nearest table. "Evan just needs to look at the rear wall in daylight." Since yesterday became dramatic. The man with her lifted one hand. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then leave," Nia said from the register. Not loudly, but every person in line heard it. Marlene's eyes slid over Nia like she was a stain. "This is family business." I felt the old trap open under my feet. Family business meant I was supposed to become smaller. It meant I was daughter when they needed obedience, employee when they needed labor, outsider when they wanted the proceeds. But my father was standing there in my apron with strawberry water on his sleeves, and the room was full of people who knew exactly who opened the door for them every morning. I walked to the table and looked into Marlene's box. At first I thought it was junk from the storage room. Then I saw the green ceramic sugar bowl with the chipped lid, the one my mother kept by the register when this place was still only 3 tables and a toaster oven. Under it were old menu boards, a bundle of faded holiday ribbons, and the brass bell that used to hang over the door before the spring broke. Marlene had taken the pieces of my mother's cafe from the back room and packed them like trash. My father saw them at the same time. His face changed before he could hide it. Marlene touched the top of the box. "I thought we'd start clearing personal items. It's easier if we don't get sentimental." Something in me went very still. Not calm. Past calm. I picked up the brass bell, cold and heavy in my palm, and held it out to my father. "Tell her whose personal items these are," I said. Marlene sighed. "Jenna, don't make this a scene." I kept my eyes on him. The whole cafe seemed to lean toward his answer. For once, no pastor, no contractor, no envelope, no numbers could speak for him. He had to choose where he was standing, and with whom. My father took the bell from my hand. His fingers closed around it like he remembered the exact sound it used to make. "Marlene," he said, his voice rough enough to scrape, "put the box back." The next morning, I was cracking eggs into a steel bowl when the back door opened before the bell on the front door ever rang. That sound hit me wrong. Customers came through the front. Deliveries knocked twice. People who thought the cafe belonged to them used the back door. I looked up and saw Marlene standing there in her cream coat, one hand on the knob and the same cardboard box against her hip, with Evan behind her, and a woman I had never seen, carrying a slim leather folder against her chest, like she was afraid the flour in my kitchen might touch it. Nia froze beside the espresso machine. Don was at the prep sink in the apron I had made him wear the day before, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a bowl of strawberries in front of him. For 1 second nobody moved. Then Marlene said, too brightly, "We're here for the formal inspection, it won't interfere." The woman with the folder glanced at Don, not at me. That told me enough. I put the whisk down, wiped my hands on a towel and said, "This kitchen is open. Nobody walks through it today." Marlene gave a little laugh, the one she used when she wanted me to sound childish before I had even finished speaking. "Jenna, don't start. This is exactly why your father needs help handling things." She stepped over the threshold like the sentence itself had cleared the room for her. Evan followed, looking past me toward the rear wall, already measuring with his eyes. The woman stayed by the door, careful, waiting for the real owner to speak. Don did not speak fast. That was the worst part. He turned off the faucet, set the strawberries down, and took off the apron slowly enough that I thought I had lost him again. Marlene saw it too. Her mouth softened with relief, like she knew he was about to smooth it all over for her. But Don folded the apron once, laid it on the counter, and walked between Marlene and the kitchen. He said, "No, it was not loud. It was almost too small for everything it had to carry." But the room changed. Evan stopped with one foot forward. Marlene's face tightened. The woman with the folder looked down at the floor, then back up at Dawn. He swallowed and kept going. "I authorized the first access. I let Marlene talk to the group. I let them believe Jenna could be moved out if the number was good enough." He looked at me then, and the shame in his face was not useful, but it was real. "I refinanced against the building. I was trying to cover debt I didn't want to admit. Some of it was mine. Some of it was because I tried to fix Marlene's mess and called it family." Marlene snapped. "Dawn." He did not turn toward her. "You took things out of this cafe without asking my daughter. You brought people through her workspace. You treated her like a tenant I hadn't gotten around to evicting." His voice cracked on that last word, and he steadied it with both hands on the edge of the prep table. "That ends now." The woman with the folder finally spoke. "Mr. Rourke, we have a purchase discussion pending. If you're withdrawing access, I need that stated clearly." Dawn faced her. "Then hear it clearly. There will be no walkthrough. There will be no inspection. There will be no sale of this building to your group." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old ring of keys. The keys had been on his belt my whole childhood, jangling when he carried flour from the storeroom or came in late from the bank. He held them for a second like they weighed more than metal, then put them in my palm. "Jenna controls access. Not Marlene. Not me on a bad day. Jenna." Marlene looked as if he had slapped her. "You are going to ruin yourself for a coffee shop." "No," he said. "I almost ruined my daughter for one more rescue I couldn't afford." That landed harder than any apology he could have given me. Not because it fixed everything. It didn't. The debt still existed. The building still had his name on it. But the lie that had made me small in every room had finally been said out loud by the person who built it. Marlene stood there with her hand on the box she had carried back in. The same box of my mother's things. And for the first time she looked unsure of where to put it. I walked to her and took it from her arms. She resisted for a breath, just enough for the woman with the folder to see it. Then she let go. Evan backed out first. The woman followed him, already closing her folder. Marlene stayed until the door was almost shut, then said, "You'll call me when you realize what she costs you." Dawn looked at the strawberries, at the wet green tops scattered in the sink, and said, "No, Marlene. I already know what I cost her." She left without another word, and the back door closed with a flat click that sounded smaller than all the fear it had carried into my life. We opened 20 minutes late. Nia changed the chalkboard while I put the pastry case back exactly where it belonged. Don did not disappear. He washed the strawberries, burned one tray of biscuits, and took 3 orders wrong before Mrs. Alvarez leaned over the counter and told him, "You listen better with that apron on." He put it back on without arguing. At noon, he told me we would meet with the bank that afternoon and begin putting a long-term lease and transfer plan in writing, before another dollar moved through that building. I said, "Not someday." He nodded. "Today." That was the boundary I needed, and this time I did not soften it for him. The visible consequence came before sunset. The property group's sign never appeared in our window. Instead, Don stood on a chair and rehung my mother's brass bell above the front door, while I held the chair steady with both hands. He had to try twice because his fingers shook. When he climbed down, he didn't ask if we were okay. He just touched the counter once, like he was asking permission to remain standing there, and went back to the sink. That evening, after the last customer left, I locked the front door with the key he had given me. The cafe was quiet except for the cooler humming under the pastry case. Above me, the brass bell hung crooked by less than an inch, and on its rim was the tiny dark thumbprint my mother had worn into the metal from years of lifting it off the hook at closing time.